just with Ray.
Good evening. Welcome to Matinee Free Webinar. Today, we are talking about a wonderful topic, peer pressure. Not only in schools or teens or youngsters, peer pressure is always with all, in any age. So, along with peer pressure, we have another issue we call drug abuse. And these both issues will be coming under positive mental health, and we have two eminent speakers, Ray and Matt, both from USA, following EQ4PEACE and emotional intelligence as well as positive mental health. So today I welcome both of you for this session. Thank you.
And we do have our share of drug abuse in the United States. So
yeah.
And this is what I basically dealt with as a health education teacher all my life. So this is my field here. So I'm going to say a few things that might sound a little unusual, but we'll see. Okay, share. All right, let me get to slideshow. Beginning, there we go. Okay, so that's the title of today. Is applying the principles and practices of positive mental health, or PMS as Matt calls it. That's got another, doesn't that mean something else? PMS, premenstrual
PMH,
syndrome.
PMH.
Oh, yeah. They're the problems of peer pressure and substance abuse, okay? So anyways, let's start with talking about peer pressure. Peer pressure, I've always felt it's a misleading term because it suggests that pressure is coming from outside someone, from their peers, and children and teens are taught to deal with it as if it's an external force, but it's not. The pressure comes from inside someone, not outside someone. Now, the internal pressure might be to think, feel, say, and do the same as peers, to not think, feel, say, or act differently, to do as peers want or demand, to not do anything to offend peers, and to not do something they would get upset about. And to understand what really needs to be done about this, I always like to work with a formula that we use. Event plus thoughts equals feelings, and your feelings drive your behavior. Now, if you put it into words, anything that someone else says or does, or that happens or might, is just an event. Events can be real time, they could be happening right now, they could be remembered, or they can be imagined. Now, it's what someone chooses to think about real time, remembered, or imagined events that causes how they feel. It's not the event itself that causes feelings. Thoughts cause feelings, not events. Now, pressure is really anxiety. Anxiety comes from imagining something happening and telling yourself it would be awful if it did. Now, if someone said, who cares if that happens, they wouldn't generate anxiety. They might have some concern, but not anxiety. Anxiety is called a figment of imagination. And the reason is because it's about things that could happen, but haven't happened yet, and often never do. We all worry about things a lot more than what really happens. Now, here's some possible imagined events a child or teen might have. Peers won't like what a child or teen says or does. They would get upset with them. They would make fun of them, which is something children and teens fear greatly. It's a very big perceived threat. The child or teen would not get or would lose their peer acceptance, approval, respect, or friendship. The peers wouldn't want to be friends anymore. Not only that, but they would turn others against the child or teen, and the child or teen would end up alone. That's probably the ultimate thing they might imagine. Now, all those imagined events could happen, and they do. They happen quite a bit in schools. To imagine such things happening is part of being human and understandable for a child or teen to do. But it's not the events that cause anxiety or pressure. It's what a child thinks about their peers' acceptance, approval, respect, or friendship that causes the anxiety or pressure, or doesn't. And thoughts cause feelings, not events, as I said earlier. Now, emotion, we'll do some of the basics here. Emotion is energy to move, to help us deal with perceived threats, to help us get what we want and need. And if you get enough emotion, if the greater the perceived threat, the more emotion or energy to move we generate. And we're hardwired to do that. There's nothing we can do about that. Once your brain perceives a threat, it's automatic for emotion to come. And anxiety is part of the fleeing part, the flee part or flight part of the fight or flight or freeze response that we all have built in, that we're all hardwired to do when we perceive a threat. Now, so as the perceived threat goes up, you're more likely to end up experiencing anxiety instead of concern or being calm. And then you're more likely, as it goes up, to have not just a low frequency, intensity, and duration of anxiety, but a high frequency, intensity, and duration of anxiety. Now, so there's three basic ways you could look at anything, including others' acceptance, approval, respect, and friendship. One is you could not care about it, and you could sort of not care about it, or really not care about it. Now, then you could want, prefer, or desire someone's acceptance, approval, respect, or friendship, and you could sort of want it or really want it. And the same thing, then you could go up to the next level where you think you need it, and it's a necessity in your life, and demand it of yourself and life. And you could go from sort of thinking you need it to really thinking you need it. Now, it's perfectly understandable, as I said earlier, and part of being human and part of being a child or teen, to want, prefer, and desire peer acceptance, approval, respect, and friendship. We're social human beings. That's why our species has survived and thrived throughout eons of history, because we're social, and there's protection in that. Or even, it's even understandable to think you need it, because Dr. Ellis used to say that the tendency to think you need something you simply want, he believed it was an innate tendency, something we're just have. Now, so what happens if you imagine not getting or losing acceptance, approval, and respect or friendship you want, prefer, and desire? Well, it depends on where you set your thermostat, your think thermostat. If you don't care about losing those things or not getting those things, there's no threat. And it's easy to stay calm, and there's no pressure to conform. But if you want those things, there will be a certain degree of threat, and you'll have some concern about what might happen if you don't conform to what they want, and there'll be some pressure to conform. And how much of a threat that represents will depend on how much or badly someone wants, prefers, or desires their peer acceptance, approval, respect, or friendship. Now, but if you turn it up to need, then the threat, the perceived threat, gets much better, and you're more likely to generate anxiety and have a high amount or a very large amount of pressure. Now, children can even, and everybody does this, anyone, including children and teens, could equate some peers' acceptance, approval, respect, and friendship to air, water, and food in their own minds. Now, if they do that, that makes not getting it or losing it seem like suffocating, dying of thirst, or hunger, which maxes out the perceived threat. That's the maximum perceived threat, to suffocate or die of thirst or hunger. Now, it's why we say, for these reasons, it's why I say, I say peer pressure comes from inside someone, not from outside someone. So what are we going to do about that? Now, peers don't even need to say or do anything for someone to put pressure on him or herself, because they can do all this in their own head. They can imagine all these things happen, even though they may not ever happen. Remember, anxiety is a figment of imagination. Now, the way children and teens are typically taught to deal with so-called peer pressure is what I would call verbal karate. Like Nancy Reagan many years ago came up with the just say no. So for a long time, kids were taught just say no to peer pressure, just say no to drugs and alcohol. And that's what I would call verbal karate. It's kind of like you're defending what other people want you to do with verbal strategies. Now, the problem is, but if a child sets his think thermostat at need for their peers' acceptance, approval, respect, and friendship, it's simply too scary to risk not getting such things or risk losing them. So they're unlikely to do these things. And very often kids don't do what they're taught to do, the verbal karate. Now, so how should we really prepare children and teens to deal with so-called peer pressure? That's the question. Well, one of the things we want to do is challenge where they set their think thermostat, okay? And the way I would start is do something we call affirm the preference. I would start out by saying, look, it's perfectly understandable for you to want, prefer, desire the acceptance, approval, respect, or friendship of other children and teens. That's part of being human. It's even understandable for you to think you need such things. And then, but, there's a big but. So that's what we call affirming their preference. Just saying it's okay for you to want it or even think you need it. But then we do some challenges. Why do you need such things? Do you need them or just want them? You need air, water, and food, so we can set that up as a comparison. You'll die in minutes, days, or weeks without them. Do you need these things? Do you need acceptance, approval, and respect like you need, or love, like you need air, water, or food? Are you going to die if you don't get them or lose them? And of course, the answer to that is no. People go their whole lifetimes without as much acceptance, respect, approval, or love as they would like, and they're not as happy as they could be, but they don't die. So do you need them, or are they simply nice things to have? And those are the challenges we would use to try to get somebody to bring that think thermostat down. Okay, so the goal is not to get them to not care about other people's acceptance, approval, and respect. It's simply to turn it down a notch from thinking they need it to simply wanting it. Okay, because when people think they need something, it can make otherwise smart people do really stupid things, like start using drugs with somebody else because other people are doing it, or start drinking heavily because other people are doing it. Okay, and we always say that a perceived need, behavior intended to satisfy a perceived need, will win out over behavior intended to satisfy a rational preference. Okay, now a perceived need is to get along with your friends and have them like you and approve of you and accept you. Well, then what would you do to get that? Just about anything. Okay, just like if you were suffocating, what would you do to get air? Well, anything. Well, if you start to think you need their acceptance, approval, and respect, or friendship, like you need air, water, and food, then you're willing to do just about anything to get it or keep it. And that's what creates the peer pressure. So we're challenging where they set their think thermostat. Now, this will free them to respond in the best possible way to situations involving peers, situations where peer acceptance, approval, respect, or friendship could be at stake. They might very well be. Some people might turn away from me if you don't do what they want and don't comply with what they'd like. Or they simply imagine those things. Okay. Now, so the idea is to try to get them to have some concern about losing or not getting acceptance, approval, respect, or friendship, but not to have anxiety about it, because that would increase the pressure a great deal. So that brings us to substance abuse and what we can do about that, because that's often the outcome of what people call peer pressure. Now, there's a basic psychological principle. Behavior starts and continues because it serves a purpose. Behavior is always purposeful. People always have something in mind when they do what they do. Now, so what gives purpose to unhealthy, self-defeating, or even self-destructive behavior is that people generate what I like to call a dysfunctional amount of emotion, okay? Which means it doesn't work for them, as instead of the way emotion is supposed to. It's supposed to work for you to help you deal with threats and get what you want and need. Well, this works against you instead. And they generate that in response to real-time, remembered, or imagined life events. Now, a dysfunctional emotion, what I mean by that is it's more than is necessary or helpful, more than they want to have, more than they know what to do with, and it's a type and frequency, intensity, and duration that works against them instead of for them, as emotion is intended to do. Now, the thing about this is you can take away or deprive someone of alcohol or drugs, like put them in rehab or in jail, but they're left with the feelings that gave purpose to using those things. And it's why people often substitute some other unhealthy behavior for the alcohol or drugs. Sometimes they substitute a healthy behavior, like exercise. Some people become marathon runners after they've become clean of drugs and alcohol. But then sometimes they abuse that too, and they end up with other problems, physical problems. Sounds like my grandkids are up here. They're going to want to talk to me. All right. there's two ways to make a situation you don't like worse. Do nothing and overreact to it. And the more emotion someone generates, the more reactive to life situations and less response able or less able to respond in the best possible way they become. Now, so if you're calm, you probably wouldn't do anything because you don't have any energy to move. If you have frustration, irritation, annoyance, concern, sadness, regret, or remorse, you have some energy to move, to motivate you to do something, but you're still relatively free to respond in the best possible way, to think things through, okay, to consider consequences and so forth. But once you turn it up to the top there, you get all this energy to move, you start to become much more reactive, okay, and might even overreact, which could make a situation worse than it is already. Now, using and abusing alcohol or drugs is a way of reacting to real-time, remembered or imagined life events rather than responding to them in the best possible way. Now, so that's how I would set it up in a chart. Now, responding might involve reaching out to others, talking to others, seeking help of some professional person, or even just friends. Those would be ways of responding to how you're feeling. But if you go back here, if you smoke, drink, or use drugs, think about people when they light up a cigarette. Very often they're very nervous at the time. And, it's like, and as soon as they take that first puff, they get this sense of relief, okay? Now, people can also have, another way to come at this is people can also have what Rudolf Dreikers, who was a psychologist, called mistaken goals. And mistaken goals means someone gets something out of the way they behave, but it makes getting what they really want in the long run, like a nice life, friendships, success, getting what they really want in the long run harder, okay? Now, he had a model. He said there's when kids misbehave in classrooms, they have 4 basic mistaken goals. One is attention, power and control is another one, revenge, or avoidance of failure. And when I saw this model, I thought, this is not just kids in a classroom. This is everybody. People in relationships of all kinds have these mistaken goals sometimes. Many times, husbands and wives and brothers and sisters fight about power and control or revenge, getting even, okay? So I also added another one I call withdrawal, avoidance, and relief. Sometimes people try to withdraw from, avoid unpleasantness in their life, or get relief from the feelings that go with that. Now, the more emotion someone generates, the more likely they are to have mistaken goals. Now, people can have any of these mistaken goals in starting to use alcohol or drugs, okay, or tobacco. For example, they could do it to gain the acceptance, approval, and respect of peers, which would be attention. They could do it for power and control, to demonstrate to parents and others, like police or teachers, that they're in control of their life instead of those other people, and that they can do whatever they want to, no matter how much it hurts them, okay? And I used to, when I was a kid, my grandparents used to always say, you win a battle, but you lose a war. So I proved to people that I can do whatever I want, but then I end up addicted to drugs or alcohol. I lose the war, okay? Or revenge. They might do it to get even with parents or others for some perceived wrongdoing, knowing that parents wouldn't like them drinking, smoking, or using drugs, okay? Now, my grandparents used to always say, you're cutting off your nose to spite your face, meaning you're hurting yourself more than anyone else. Okay. Now, you could also do it to avoid it, for avoidance of failure, because by doing those things, it tends to lower everyone's expectations of you if you start using alcohol, drugs, and so forth. But you could also do it to get relief from feeling that they don't like having. Everyone knows that, and if they ever try these things, they realize that the problem with these things is they do work. They do give people temporary relief from the way they feel. If you drink enough of them, or if you drink enough alcohol or take enough drugs, or you end up unconscious and you don't have to think or feel anything for a while. Now, this is how I would set up a chart if I matched up the feelings with the mistaken goals. Attention would probably derive from being lonely. Anger would probably give rise to power and control or revenge. Avoidance of failure would probably arise from having anxiety or shame. And withdrawal, avoidance, or relief could be a response to having anxiety, shame, guilt, depression, or loneliness. Now, I want to say something real quick about loneliness, because we've heard a lot of talk about that since the pandemic, where people were isolated. Loneliness doesn't come from being alone. It comes from what you think about being alone, how you view being with others, okay, or without them. For example, if you don't care about being with others, there's no loneliness, okay, if you're alone. But if you want, prefer, and desire to be with people, and then you can't be for some reason, you'll have a certain amount of loneliness. But if you think you need to be with other people, perhaps like you need air, water, and food, and then you can't be, either because they're somewhere else or they leave you and don't want to be around you anymore, then being alone becomes much, you experience much more loneliness, a much higher frequency, intensity, and duration of loneliness. Now, the reason they abuse substances is to withdraw, avoid unpleasantness in their lives and get relief from the feelings that go with unpleasant life events. That's why they end up abusing those things, okay, including loneliness as a feeling. Now, as far as what to do about this, and there's an old saying from Ben Franklin many years ago, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and that's especially true with substance abuse. Anybody who ever dealt with it would know that. Okay, prevention means, in my mind at least, teaching people to generate a more functional amount of emotion in response to their real-time, remembered, or imagined events. Now, Dr. Albert Ellis used to always say therapy should be educational, and unfortunately, often it's not. And education can be very therapeutic. And I very much believe in the last part, that education is the key to so many things. Now, it's kind of like a version of that old saying, give me a fish and I eat for a day. Many times therapy is that. They give somebody a fish, they feel good when they walk out of a therapy session. But after that, they go back to feeling the same old way. And by the time they come back next week for therapy, they're ready for another therapy session. They need another fish to get them through a week. But our idea is to teach them to fish so they eat for a lifetime. Teach them how to get better, to permanently reduce the frequency, intensity, and duration of emotions they don't like having in their life so that they can live a better life and be less prone to seek out relief from things like drugs and alcohol. I like to call this mental and emotional vaccination, okay? And in this case, instead of against a virus or something else, it's against a substance abuse and other unhealthy behaviors. And basically, there's 4 steps to mental and emotional vaccination. 1, you teach and encourage young people to have unconditional self-acceptance. I'm going to go through each one of these, what Dr. Ellis used to call USA. There's also UOA, which is unconditional other acceptance. Second step is to teach and encourage them to develop an internal locus of control, and I'll explain what that means. And the third step is to teach them to recognize irrational thinking in themselves and others, and most importantly, teach them how to challenge and correct that. So let's start with step 1, which is teach and encourage them to choose to have unconditional self-acceptance. The reason that's important is shame. Shame comes from believing you're not living up to expectations, either others or your own. Now, we all have plenty of expectations placed on us from early on, and we place many more on ourselves, okay? That means plenty of opportunities to feel shame. And I really believe there's a lot more shame out there. And I think Dr. Ellis acknowledged this or realized this too, a lot more shame out there than most people realize. Okay, a lot of people feel shame and really don't realize what they're feeling. Now, shame can be both a primary or secondary disturbance. And what that means is shame can be the primary feeling, and it very often is, that people seek relief from by drinking, using drugs, shutting down in school, dropping out of school, or even suicide. Now, when I used to live in Illinois, there was a real upscale school where the area is very wealthy, and they had 3 kids walk in front of commuter trains within a span of a month. Well, those kids aren't walking in front of commuter trains because they're depressed. Well, they might be depressed too, but the big part of the reason they're walking in front of those things is because they have shame, because they come from families that are very successful and very wealthy. And they have all this, and they have what I call hard acts to follow. They have doctors and lawyers and businessmen who are fathers and mothers. And they have, it makes their expectations of themselves, and their parental expectations might be high, but they also have really high expectations of themselves. And it's easy for them to not feel like they're living up to them and feel a lot of shame. Now, it can also be what we call a secondary disturbance, which means it makes people want to keep what they think and feel, mistakes they've made, what they struggle with, or even who they are, perhaps if they're LGBTQ, a secret. And it makes people less likely or willing to seek or accept help that is available to them. Now, Dr. Ellis used to sum this effect up by saying shame blocks change. So if we want people to change while they're going through REBT therapy, we've got to deal with the shame first. So they'll be willing to look at what they're doing and what's going on in their life, what's going on in their mind, and not be afraid to address it and try to fix it. Now, the way keeping secrets, this is a very important part, because keeping secrets can play out very tragically. And the reason is very simple. It allows people to repeat irrational and unhelpful thoughts they have about themselves, others in life, like what we call a broken record. In the old days when we had records, they would get stuck and they would just keep playing the same part of the song. And then you don't get that kind of challenge you might get if you said it out loud to a parent, a teacher, or a friend. And this repetition ruts these irrational thoughts in someone's brains, and these ruts make thoughts automatic. And that automatic, the fact that thoughts become automatic makes simple opinions or even falsehoods about others, themselves, and life start to seem like facts, givens, or truths. And these facts, quote unquote, become the irrational logic of all kinds of unhealthy, self-defeating, even self-destructive behavior like suicide. Okay. And very often when someone takes their life, very often people around them will say, I didn't even know anything was wrong. I thought everything was fine. Well, that's because they're so good at keeping secrets. And the reason they keep secrets is because of the shame they feel. Because by sharing what they struggle with, the thoughts and feelings they have, to them, that's one more way of not living up to expectations. Now, and what I mean by irrational logic is what they think is irrational because it causes them to feel worse than necessarily helpful. And what they end up doing is irrational because it makes their lives and sometimes the lives of others worse instead of better. It might even end their life. And then people who are left, their loved ones behind, their lives are worse because this person's gone. But it makes sense to them and seems logical because of what they become to believe is true. It's why people attempt suicide. For example, imagine having these thoughts. Now, if you're an 80-year-old man suffering with some terminal illness and in pain every day, well, these might be facts. You know, what's happening is really awful. I shouldn't have to deal with this. I can't stand what's happening. I can't take it anymore. I have to make it stop. That would be understandable. But if you're a teenager and otherwise physically healthy and have these thoughts, but believe them to be facts, you might start thinking that taking your life at the age of 14 or 13 or 17 makes sense, okay? Because you truly believe these things, even though they're just simple opinions about your life or yourself, okay? Now, so unconditional self-acceptance means this. It means choosing to see whatever you think, feel, say, or do, have in the past or might in the future as part of being human and understandable given what your life experiences have been, which may have been much different or worse than other people. I almost died 3 times by the time I was, actually 5 times by the time I was 30. So I had a lot of anxiety about death and dying. That's understandable. Other people didn't have those 5 near-death experiences. Now, part of being human means you'll never be the first or last human being in history to think, feel, say, or do something, to make a particular mistake, to not live up to expectations, or struggle with something, or be LGBTQ. You always have a lot of company no matter what it is. Now, understandable means that if you put others through all the same exact experiences you've been through, they'd probably end up thinking, feeling, saying, doing much the same, making some of the same mistakes, and struggling with the same things you do. Some might fare better, some might fare worse, but most would probably end up much the same. Now, so let's go to step 2 now. And this is a very important part. When I work with kids, very often at the very beginning, I'll promise to give them what I call real power and control over their lives. The real power and control is not getting angry and telling people off and doing things people don't want you. That's not real power and control, or getting physical. Real power and control is being able to choose how you're going to feel and choose and get your life to play out the way you'd like it to. That's real power and control. And this is one of the most important steps to getting that to happen. Now, locus of control means where you see your feelings coming from, what you see as the cause of them. You can have an external or outer or internal or inner locus of control. The majority of people walking the planet, I mean the vast majority, have an external locus of control, which means they wrongly see what others say and do and what happens as the cause of how they feel. You just need to listen to the way they talk. Well, that really pissed me off. You know, that person made me mad. They hurt my feelings. That's the way people talk about things. And that's understandable because we grow up with people who talk like that and look at the world that way. And also because events and feelings are so close together, they happen so quickly, one thing to the next, that it's easy to conclude that there's nothing in between, but there is. There's thoughts, okay? So that's the formula we work with. Event plus thoughts equals feelings, okay? And then your feelings will drive your behavior. Now, it's not the event that causes how someone feels. It's what someone chooses to think about real-time, remembered, or imagined events that causes how they feel. Thoughts cause feelings, not events. Now, it's like that old formula you will learn well, probably when you're in 5th or 6th grade, we first start learning algebra, where A plus B equals C, where A is a constant and B is a variable. If A stays the same and you change B, C changes. Now, so likewise, if you change the way you think about an event or others, yourself and life, the feeling changes, perhaps for the better, perhaps for the worse, depending on what your new thoughts are. And Dr. Ellis used to have a formula, A plus B equals C, where A is the activating event, B is your beliefs about the event, yourself, others, and life, and C is the consequences, or what you feel and do as a consequence of what you believe about the activating event. That was his ABC theory of emotions. Now, here's some facts of life. There's always more than one way to think about or look at anything that happens. Some of those ways will make us feel better, others worse. Some ways will make it easier to deal with what you don't like, others harder. When you pick one to the exclusion of others, you've made a choice. And the important thing is you could always choose to think about or look at things in a different way. And that might make you feel better. So you have at this point in this formula, choice. Okay, and choice is power. Choice is something you alone can make. No one else can affect. They can influence the way you make choices, but they can't determine or dictate the way you make those choices. Even a neurosurgeon, if he went inside your head and was doing brain surgery, he doesn't really know where and there to look to get you to make a certain choice or have a certain thought. It's just something you alone have control over, or at least can learn to have control over. Many people are unconsciously incompetent because they don't have control over that. Well, you can learn to be first consciously competent and gain control over your choices and eventually become unconsciously incompetent, or those choices become, the new ways of thinking become automatic. So we say it's your choice how you want to feel, and that's something we teach because there's always more than one way to look at things. Therefore, you have a choice how you want to look at things. Whatever way you choose to look at things will be part of being human and understandable, given what you've been through. But the way you choose to look at things really determines how you feel. So therefore, to a large degree, you have a choice how you want to feel. Now, so that's how I would diagram it if I was using that formula. So you have a choice how you want to think. That also gives you the power to have the choice how you want to feel. Now, you have a bunch of other what I call cognitive choices. You know, we all have a choice, and you're making these right now. How you look at what happens, yourself, others, and life. What meaning you attach to what happens. What you focus on. What you compare things to. What you remember about the past. What you imagine will happen in the future. What you expect of others, yourself, and life. How much importance you attach to what does happen. And what you spend your time literally thinking about. Now, the other thing about this, we need to teach people or encourage people to try to start talking in scientifically and semantically correct and precise ways. Now, these are incorrect and imprecise ways people talk all the time. They say, that pissed me off. Well, that is just an event. It's not the event that makes you angry, it's what you think about it. Or they hurt my feelings. You can't hurt feelings. Feelings are something, you can't put your hand on them, you can't see them. You can see what people look like when they have a feeling, but you can't hurt feelings. Okay, so that's nonsensical. Or people say they put a lot of pressure on me. Well, pressure comes from inside, not outside. My job is stressing me out. No, it's really what you're thinking about the job and the expectations that are there with it that causes you to be stressed out, not the job. Because a lot of people could have the same job and not be stressed out, and you could be very stressed out. That's so depressing. Well, that's not depressing. It's just that movie or whatever happened is just an event. Or he made me feel so guilty. No one can really make you feel anything, including guilty. So these are more correct and precise ways to talk. No one upsets me, I upset myself. You can't hurt feelings. Pressure comes from inside me, not outside. I'm stressing myself out. Okay, I'm depressing myself about that. I'm making myself feel guilty. What the good thing about talking this way is it reminds you that you have choices, and it reminds you or helps you see or become more aware of all this opportunity to feel better. Whereas if you keep talking the old way, you don't see those opportunities to feel better. Now, so some other ways of talking is no one upsets me, I upset myself. And I have that, yeah, that one was there. Okay, it's my choice how I want to feel. They're not responsible for how I feel, I am. I'm responsible for how I feel, not them. It's not their job to make me feel better, it's mine. It's my job to make myself feel good, not theirs. So this whole idea of happiness, no one can make another person happy. No one can make someone feel pride or be proud of you. That's when people say, go out there and make me proud of you. You can't do that. That's a choice every person has to make to feel pride or be happy or not. Now, this all includes, all these things we're saying includes how you feel about yourself, because your self-image is how you look at yourself. Your self-image determines how you feel about yourself, and those are your choices alone to make. What other people think, feel, say about you, that's their choice. But your choice is how you think about or look at yourself and how you end up therefore feeling about yourself. Now, there's an old quote from Eleanor Roosevelt: no one can make you feel bad about yourself without your permission, or sometimes she would say consent. And Dr. Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor, used to say, everything can be taken from us but the last of human freedoms, to choose one's own attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. The short version is your last freedom is your attitude. Now, this is the basis of what I call mental and emotional karate, which is defending yourself against the verbal or perhaps cyber attacks of other people. And it would be something like this. This would be a way to defend, for you to say, and this be your automatic response to attacks by other people. You can think, feel, say whatever you want to about me. That's your choice. But it's my choice how I look at and think and feel about myself. And you don't get to make those choices for me unless I let you. And I choose not to. I choose to look at myself the way I want to. I choose to feel the way I want to about myself. Now, that's what I would call a black belt in mental and emotional karate. Now, another part of developing an internal locus of control is recognize, remind yourself what you do and don't control. Now, many people talk and act and think as if they can control what others think, feel, say, and do. But the reality is you can't. If you're a teacher, all you have to have is one disruptive student in a classroom. You'll learn that lesson real fast. You can't control what others think, feel, say, and do. Others can think, feel, say, or do whatever they want to, even things you don't like, don't agree with. No one has to think, feel, say, or do anything, in particular, what you want, okay? The best you can do is hope to influence what people think, feel, say, and do. And there's ways you can do that. Sometimes you can be successful. The only person you really ever control is you and what you think, feel, say, and do. And that's a big enough job for most people. And it takes some practice to get good at that. Now, the reason it's important is because the more you try to control what others think, feel, say, and do, the more out of control your life will feel, and the more you'll find to get upset about. Okay, the more you try to control what you think, feel, say, and do, the more in control you'll feel of your life, and the less you'll find to get upset about. Now, there's an old serenity poem or prayer. It says, grant me, sometimes they use the word God in there, God, grant me the courage to change things I can, the serenity or peace to accept things I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. Now, step 3 is to teach someone to recognize irrational thinking in themselves and others. Now, Dr. Albert Ellis had 4 basic types of thinking, irrational thoughts: demandingness, awfulizing, can't standarditis, and label and damning. Okay, so let's start with demandingness. As I said earlier, there's 3 basic ways you can look at something. You can not care about it, and you could really not care about it, or just sort of not care about it. You could want, prefer, and desire it, and you could sort of want it, prefer, and desire it, or really want, prefer, and desire it. And then you can think you need it, it's a necessity, and demand it, and just sort of do that, or really do that. Now, rule number 1, you have the right to want whatever you want. Everyone has that right. The cognitive missteps or mistakes that people make, according to Dr. Elvis, and I agree with this wholeheartedly, is they start to think they need things they simply want. They start to treat simple preferences as necessities, and they start to demand what they simply desire. Now, remember, emotion is energy to move, to help us deal with perceived threats, to help us get what we want and need. Well, rule number 2 explains why all this is important. The greater the perceived difference, and the key word there is perceived, between your expectations and your perceived reality, because sometimes people think things aren't really the way they really are. Okay, there's an old saying that perception is reality. Well, that doesn't mean reality, what they're perceiving is reality, it just means they think it is. The greater your perceived difference between your expectations and your perceived reality, the greater the perceived threat will be, and the more emotion you'll generate, okay? Because that's what emotion's for. And Shakespeare, I like this quote from Shakespeare, expectation is the root of all heartache. Now, so if you don't care about something and you don't get it, lose it, or simply imagine doing either, there's no feeling, there's no threat, so there's no feeling. It's easy to stay calm. Once you start to want, prefer, and desire something, there's always a possibility you won't get it or lose it, or you might just imagine doing either. And there'll be a certain amount of threat that goes with that. So you might generate concern or frustration, irritation, or annoyance. But if you start to think you need it, like you need it, perhaps like you need air, water, and food, then the threat gets much bigger in not getting it, losing it, or if you just simply imagine doing it, or you'll generate anxiety or anger, for example. Now, the same happens with depression and loneliness. If I don't care if I'm with people or some particular person, and I can't be, there's no threat. But if I think I need to be with that person, like my wife, for example, or my kids, and then I can't be, that's perceived that as much greater threat, and I might be depressed or have a high frequency, intensity, and duration of loneliness because of the way I set it up, where I set my think thermostat. Now, you can make demands of others, yourself, and life. Now, there's a little chart you can create here that anger tends to come from making demands of others. You can also get angry because you make demands of yourself and life and they don't get met. But anxiety tends to come from making demands of yourself before an event, like before a test, before a job interview, before something you have to do at work. Shame and guilt tends to come from making demands yourself afterwards. And anxiety also comes from making demands of life before an event, like saying everything has to go perfectly, nothing can go wrong. You know, I can't make any mistakes, okay? And depression comes from making demands of life, and I'll explain that a little bit more as we go through here. Now, so a simple model for stress would be this. Very often when you hear people stressing themselves out, it's not just that they want to do certain things, they tell themselves they have to. And that makes not doing it a much bigger threat. So they generate anxiety instead of simple concern. And there's a much greater, higher frequency, intensity, and duration of what they would call stress, but it's really anxiety. And then that might flip into anger, okay? Now, we also talk about shoulding on others, yourself, or life, using the verb should or shouldn't in your thoughts and comments. Now, for example, if you say, I should have done that, or I shouldn't have done that, you're likely to experience shame and guilt. Okay, because you're basically saying I should have, I needed to, or I had to do that and I didn't. So it's a big deal. Now, versus saying, I wish I had, or I wish I hadn't, which tones it down a little bit. And you probably feel regret or remorse instead. Now, depression comes basically if my mother died, for example, I say, I wish this wasn't happening to me and my family. I wish I didn't have to deal with this. I'd be sad. But if I tell myself this shouldn't or can't be happening to me, I shouldn't or can't deal with this, and I have to, now I'm going to be depressed. So where I set my think thermostat by shooting on life and having high expectations of life, I create depression instead of sadness. Now, the second type of thinking is called awfulizing. There are a lot of things in life that are unpleasant, inconvenient, or uncomfortable to some degree. But what happens is people start to tell themselves it's awful, like the worst possible thing could happen. My grandfather used to always say, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. In other words, you're making something a much bigger deal than it really is. And by doing that, you're more likely to generate anger instead of frustration, irritation, or annoyance, more likely to have anxiety instead of concern if you're imagining something, and more likely to be depressed about what's happened instead of just sad, or have more loneliness. It's really awful that I can't be with my wife and kids. That might make you more likely to have more loneliness that way instead of saying, I wish, it's really unpleasant that I can't be with them. Now, the third type of thinking is called can't stand-itis. And basically what it means is this. Everyone has the right to like or dislike whatever you want to. But what people will do is they'll turn their thermostat up to, I can't stand it. And that makes them more prone to having anger, anxiety, depression, or even being really intensely lonely, as opposed to being frustrated, irritated, annoyed, having concern, or sadness if they didn't like something. Now, in label and damning is the final type of thinking. If you label and damn someone else, you're more likely to be angry than if you just simply dislike their behavior. As teachers, we're taught when we write up a student, we're supposed to talk about the behavior, not use words like he was disrespectful or he, unruly, whatever. We just say he did this. He said F-U-C-K in a classroom, and just leave it at that. Because when we start putting those other things in, we're labeling and damning the person, okay, like he's disrespectful. Now, and you're more likely to feel angry then instead of just frustration, irritation, or annoyance. You can label and damn yourself, like you might say, I'm a loser, instead of just disliking the fact that you failed a test, something like that. So you get shame and guilt instead of regret and remorse. Now, so step 4 is teach people how to challenge irrational thinking in themselves and others. Now, here's a simple way. If somebody starts, and obviously I don't have time to do all the, little intricate ways we might do this, but if you think someone thinks they need something and say, oh, I need to be with him, or I need that. You need air, water, food, you'll die in minutes, days, or weeks without them. Do you need that like you need air, water, and food? Are you going to die if you don't get that? Do you need it, or is it just nice to have? Do you need it or just want it? And if they're saying somebody has to do what I want them to, or I have to do something, why do they have to? They have to, or you just want them to? Why do you have to? Do you have to or just want to? Or if you're saying they can't talk to me like that, they can't treat me that way, why can't they? They can't, or you just don't want them to. Why can't you do something? You can't or just don't want to. Now, another technique is to put your behavior where you want your attitude to be, which means practice talking the way you want to think. So instead of saying they can't, you start forcing yourself to use what we call I messages and say, I don't want them to, or I don't like when they do that, okay? Or instead of saying they have to, I want them to, or I would like them, I'd prefer, I'd rather they do that. And that tends to bring your think thermostat down too, putting your verbal behavior where you want your attitude to be. So you start to think the way you've been talking, and it helps out. Now, or instead of saying, I shouldn't have to deal with this, I wish, or I shouldn't have done this, I wish I hadn't done this. Or instead of saying this shouldn't be happening to me, I wish this wasn't happening to me. Okay. Now, as far as awfulizing, simple questions. Is it awful, or is it just unpleasant? Is it awful, like the worst possible thing that could be happening to you? My grandfather used to always say, Could always be a lot worse, okay? Because they went through the Depression and World War II and Korean War by the time I came along. So he used to say, you don't know how bad it could be. It could always be a lot worse, okay? Is it awful or just unpleasant? It is awful or inconvenient. Is it awful or just uncomfortable? We recently lost my brother-in-law, and sometimes my wife would get up really, upset about something. I say, look, you could be your brother, okay? It's not awful, it's just unpleasant, okay? Now, you can't stand it or just don't like it. That's how you challenge can't stand-itis. So you can't stand it or just don't like it. Are you gonna die or go crazy just because of that? Because that's what you'd have to do to prove you can't stand something, die or go crazy. And as far as label and damning, you could simply say, why are they or you, whatever, stupid, lazy, whatever, just because of that one thing? They're stupid, lazy, whatever, or just did a stupid or lazy thing. They're stupid, lazy, or whatever, or just did something you didn't like. So you're trying to get it down from label and damning the person to disliking their behavior. Now, so the whole idea here is not to get them to not care about something, just to turn their thinking down a notch. So they want, prefer, and desire something instead of thinking they need it, it's necessity, and demanding it. So they view things as unpleasant, inconvenient, uncomfortable instead of awful, and tell themselves, I don't like something, which is their right as human being to not like something, instead of saying, I can't stand it. And to dislike someone's behavior or their own, which is their right as human being to dislike that, rather than label and damning the whole person, condemning the doer instead of the deed. Now, and then what happened is you'll get, instead of having anger, anxiety, depression, shame, or guilt, you're more likely to have frustration, irritation, annoyance, and concern, or sadness, or regret, or remorse instead of shame or guilt. And that free, instead of overreacting, reacting to a situation, you're freer to respond to that. And yet you'll still have some energy to move to deal with potential threats, okay, and get what you want and need. Now, so just to summarize what I said here today, peer pressure doesn't come from outside, it comes from inside us, okay? It comes from how someone looks at peer acceptance, approval, respect, and friendship. And people start and continue to talk about substance abuse. People start and continue to use and abuse substances because it serves a purpose in their life. And typically that ends up being to get relief from feelings they have that they don't like having. Now, what gives substance abuse a purpose is that they generate a dysfunctional amount of emotion, or more than is necessary or helpful, more than they want to have, more than they know to do with, in response to either real-time, remembered, or imagined life events. And my idea of dealing with that, an ounce of prevention is always worth a pound of cure. So just like we vaccinate people against viruses and bacteria, we can mentally, emotionally vaccinate against people against substance abuse and even things like suicide. And basically we do that by teaching them to generate a more functional amount of emotion in response to real-time, remembered, or imagined events. And these are some of the steps. Number one, teach and encourage them to have unconditional self-acceptance. Teach and encourage them to develop an internal locus of control. Teach them to recognize irrational thinking in themselves, and most importantly, to challenge it and correct it in themselves and others. Oh, I guess that's it. I'm done. Okay. I'm all done.
Yes. Matt? Yes.
Great stuff,
Let's
Ray.
go.
Thank you. Thank you. The very basic steps to adjusting our thinking and feeling can make some huge changes in behaviors. So it's helpful, really helpful to see how irrational beliefs and such are created and change them. So it changes everything, right? Great stuff.
So
And that's why anybody who's been following us for the past couple of weeks, I hope you see that there's some, like I've always said, whatever you try to fix, or whatever you try to build something, there's only so many tools you can use to do either thing. And the trick is knowing what tools are there that you have access to, and knowing which one's called for, and then getting good at using them. I hope what you've seen over the past couple of weeks, if you've been with us all that time, is that what I'm doing is taking the same tools and just applying them to different problems, because that's all you have to work with to make things better. But the trick is knowing what tool you want to grab and getting good at using it. So
Even knowing they exist in the first place is a big deal, because most people have no idea what you're talking about until you talk about
well,
it.
like you
And then
say,
it's like, oh,
they're unconsciously incompetent, and you want to make them consciously incompetent and then consciously competent.
yep,
And hopefully with practice, they become unconsciously competent. So that's a good model.
agreed.
Okay, thank you. If you have any doubts or any comments? Jiraman sir? Today is a wonderful topic, really, peer pressure as well as the effect of peer pressure, basically considering the substance abuse. And both will connect it with the positive mental health, how it deals with the teens, particularly students. So it's really a wonderful topic. So much contributions, really worth from Sherry and also from Matt. So Vijay sir, can you?
Yeah, it was a very wonderful topic, and the class also was wonderful, shooting the topic. So peer pressure is coming from inside. It's also a new information for me to have a good of thought. First, then the things whatever told also is think vaccination of against this. All these things are whatever you say are very simple. And you last you told the same formula you are applying to different such topics. And your formula is very, what I say is a very magic formula or whatever it is, a very thing. That is not easy to apply to our mind. This is what I find out. You told, again you are told about that. You can hear and the things will go inside your mind and you can practice and it will from unconscious it will happen unconsciously. That is what you are expecting. Let us hope for that. It's a very great thing. So change the thoughts before feeling. This is the essence of this, right? So, but it's not so easy.
Right.
It will come from within by practice. That is what I think. So whatever I was experiencing or my life, this feeling comes first. This is what I said. The thoughts, whatever you say, is unaware. Right? No? The thoughts, whatever you say, that is maybe true. That was my first connection. And I was watching you and I was hearing you and I was studying you, then I convinced thoughts comes. But these thoughts, we have to, after feeling, you have to, what you call, search for that. Before that, before feeling, you will not get the thoughts. You have to check the events and what could have been the thought. That is it so? Can you make it there?
Well, I always liken it to you have a message board on a wall, and that message is going across there. Well, they can adjust the speed of that message, and they can make it go so fast that you wouldn't be able to read it.
Yeah, right.
Well, that's how it works in your brain. Your brain you have these automatic thoughts, and they go through your head so fast that if somebody asks you, what were you thinking? You're like, I don't know. So what you got to do is slow that down. And that's what a therapist can do. For example, if I were with somebody, I'd say, do you ever hear yourself saying, and I give you an example, and you'd say, oh yeah, because if somebody gives you those thoughts and asks you if they sound familiar, you'll know whether they sound familiar, but you can't put them into words yourself. So, you might want to just sit, what you could do is just sit and make a list of thoughts. For example, take the phrase, I have to. Well, how many ways does it sound normal for you to complete that? I have to be perfect. I have to do this. I have to get this done. Just make a list of thoughts and put them on paper. That's a way of slowing that process down. And you're actually stopping it and freezing it. So it's like taking that message board and instead of it going, you just slow it down and then stop it. And then you can do something about that thought if you stop it and freeze it. But if it's flying through your head 100 miles an hour, you're unconsciously incompetent. So you got to slow that thought down. And the best way to do that is to, maybe with someone's help, put them down on paper. I always encourage people to write your thoughts down on paper because you trap them and they can't fly through your head at 100 miles an hour. And then we teach you what to do with those. And then you practice. Now think about when you're in sports, how does a coach get you to learn to do something the right way? You go very slow and practice very slow and then speed it up. And eventually you're going full speed and you do it at high speed in a game. It's the same thing. You have to start, slow it down, small steps, and then build the speed up. See, right now you have all these thoughts flying through your head at 100 miles an hour. And a lot of times you're like, I don't know what I'm thinking. But, if I asked you some questions and said, have you ever heard yourself say this? Or does this sound familiar to you? You'd probably say, oh yeah, that's exactly what I think. I have that experience all the time. I'll tell kids, I'll say, do you ever hear yourself thinking this? And they'll say, oh yeah, all the time. But if I ask them what you're thinking, a lot of times kids will say, I don't know, but if you give them examples, they'll be able to say, yeah, I recognize that. It's just that idea of that message board. You got to slow it down and freeze it.
Okay, one thing I can say that I am hearing you for many hours now. Continuously I am hearing it. Only some classes I am missing because when I wake up busy. So this let me practice in the life. Okay. This
Nobody can do it for you. People can.
This is a secret. This is a secret. Let us see.
I can't teach you how to kick a soccer ball. I can show you how to do it and maybe, position your body a certain way, but then you're the one who's got to learn to kick it, not me. So it's the same with this, like anything else, you can have guided practice, which is important, but ultimately the only person that can fix what's going on inside your head is you. And it takes a lot of work. It's not easy because you have ruts. That's why I think it's important to talk about ruts, because we all know what ruts are like when we get our bicycle or car tire stuck in ruts. You got those in your brain and you never get rid of them. You just have to create some new ones to go into instead of old ones. So, and you will go into old ruts sometimes. I still get mad at people in traffic. So, but I can get out of that rut much quicker now because of all the practice I've done.
Really, when this day now itself, this class itself, when you were talking, I was remembering a recent event, I was so, there was too much problem for me that event. That event I was thinking and I was trying to apply. This is beneficial, really it is beneficial, right?
So it's moving from abstract, really moving from abstract to the practical aspects.
Yeah, this one what I am talking. This is not easy, but it is successful. First they told us. First they told it was very new to me. Okay, then continuous talks makes me also convinced, and my efforts. There are thoughts in me continuously. I am talking about this. Let us see. I will explore more, and it will be beneficial.
You got to remember your default philosophical position should always be unconditional self-acceptance. If you struggle to make these changes we're talking about, you're part of being human.
Unconditional acceptance is what you told this today. This is what I linked with my past recent experience. So what happens, you fast it going, I missed something. Then again, I went to come to your topic. And then that time went towards that event. I won't remember, and I told if I would have unconditionally accepted myself, I would not have felt too much about that event. There was a very bad event for me recently. So like this, it was. It's right. You are right. Yeah.
If
you're
this
right.
was easy,
Yeah.
everybody would have great mental health and we wouldn't have all the problems we do. Obviously it's not. We're fighting our basic human nature. The trick is to tap into understanding what our human nature is and then targeting that in some constructive way. Like I always talk about hate, for example. We have a lot of hate now. Well, we have this natural tendency, innate tendency to note ways we're different from other people and make a bigger deal out of that than it needs to be. Well, that's fine if you're living in one little place all your life, but people are moving all over the place. We're running into people that look different than us, think different than us, feel different than us, act different than us. And it's like that innate tendency. It's an accident looking for a place to happen. So you got to understand what your human nature is, and then you can target it and start to work with it. And so you don't give in. So otherwise you're unconsciously incompetent.
Okay, thank you. Thank you once again. I think from the next week onwards, you are taking some break. You are preparing for some other new sessions, new topics also. Definitely, we are waiting for you again for the last some 14, 15 lesson or sessions. You have done wonderful topic, wonderful ideas, even minute, even simple minute things you are expressed in a very great way. That's a fantastic experience. Something can be neglected, but you have never neglected anything. Everything was exactly presented in paper and very simple, what we call it as PPT. Everybody can see it, view it, can understand it. So really wonderful time with you, both Ray and Matt. So we are waiting for you again in next sessions also. Take preparations on any other topic. We are doing with self-awareness topics, basically. This will be good for anybody. And moreover, it will last for a long time because we are uploading into the YouTube. Anybody can this. We are given a playlist also. So this playlist can be viewed at any time. So many people are asking, give something towards EQ or positive mental health or even peer pressure. I can just redirect these topics to them. So it is really a gift from your part, and we really enjoyed. And thank you once again. And we are waiting for your sessions. Make preparations and come. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having us. This has been wonderful. Really
We get
appreciate
we get frustrated because
platform.
we don't have enough outlets. So it's nice for you to provide us an outlet. So.
Yeah,
Yes.
for the time being, we are completed 754 days with these self-awareness topics. Really good for so many people. So anyway, being part of that, we really thankful to you both, and please come again. That's what I say. Okay. So
Great.
thank you once again. Tomorrow, today is another festival for Muslims. I think Khan is understanding that Eid Mubarak, the festival for Muslims. So today is that. Last time New Year celebration was the Vishu. Anyway, you are enjoying, and Onam also you are celebrated. So many festivals have come. So we are inviting you both to Kerala. We can see Kerala, so many things, so many festivals, so traditional festivals.
Come over here and I'll show you the mountains, Doc.
Yeah.
Especially the wildflowers are coming soon, and and we have fall colors.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Desert's coming alive too, so.
See, Kerala is
Gotta have a-
Someday we'll
land
show
of
up there.
cultures, land of cultures, so many cultures, so many
Yep.
traditions, so many religions, everything is mixed, coexisting. So really a wonderful place.
not
Okay,
only
thank you once
peaceful-
again. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay.
Bye,
So
guys.
thank you, Vijayaraman.
Take care.
So
Yeah, welcome. You're
see you and good night.
Yeah.